Greetings of the day, everyone. This is gonna be a live stream today. I did have another topic planned. I was gonna do just a regular Friday vlog, but as most of you who are tuning in will probably know, today is a historic day in the life of the church. We've been given a new Motu Proprio, which is a legislation that has come down from Pope Francis, and boy, are people talking about it. I've been thinking about it all day. I've been reading through it. I've been studying it, and I'm having a physiological reaction to it because I'm just so blown away by it. It's even caused me to have a bit of a headache, which I'm going to try and force through to do this live stream. But I thought we should talk about this because it's kind of urgent, and I'm actually going away on vacation, so I decided to sideline the topic I had planned for today to address this as well as I can. So this is a bit sudden, and I'm going to do my best to address it in a way that is helpful, that is encouraging, and to give you a bit of my own mind on this topic. This has the potential to be quite a bit of a hot take, actually, which is not the kind of thing I want my channel to be about. So if that's what you have been wanting from me, then then buckle up, because this could be it. But I'm hoping that the Holy Spirit will guide me in this and help me to respond in a meaningful and a productive way. So I thought what we would do first is take a look at the document. I've highlighted some key points in it that I think are really important and have some of the biggest implications in them. And we'll read through those parts together. I'll try to explain what some of that means, because I understand that some of this language can be a bit convoluted for people. And then I'll provide some of my thoughts on it, and maybe take some questions after the fact and see if there's a bit of a conversation taking place there. So let's start. This document is called Traditionis Custodes, which I hope that's the right pronunciation in Latin. And this has been anticipated for a while for those of you that are Vatican watchers, especially in traditional circles, because we have been anticipating that Francis was going to roll back the legislation that came from Pope Benedict in a Motu Proprio called Summorum Pontificum. And if you're not familiar with that, Summorum Pontificum, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it was, like I said, a legislation that came from Pope Benedict, which was designed to provide the faithful with the means to access what he calls the extraordinary form of the Mass, or the traditional Latin Mass, because there were many places where the faithful weren't being given access to that. And so Benedict wanted to provide that access, whether a local bishop wanted to provide that access or not. And so he wrote that legislation. This Motu Proprio essentially reverses that with some very specific guidelines and requirements. So we'll take a look and let's see what we can extract from this. So it starts off addressing the bishops of the church. He says, guardians of tradition, which I thought was worth highlighting. And we'll try to revisit that. But that's what the bishops are. They are guardians of tradition. That's a huge part of their role. They aren't activists. They aren't people who are trying to advance their own personal agenda. They receive the faith as it has been transmitted through countless generations, and they need to protect it. They need to be guardians of it. They are shepherds of the flock who, what does a shepherd do? A shepherd protects the flock and guides the flock and leads the flock. So they are guardians of tradition. It was interesting that was included in this. He talks a little bit about what precedes this, so Summorum Pontificum, which I had mentioned. And he says, I now desire with this apostolic letter to press on evermore in the constant search for ecclesial communion. And that's a big theme in this. There was an accompanying letter that was sent out with this that many people have spent time talking about as well. But the big supposedly motivating factor in this is the unity of the church. He calls it what did I say there? Ecclesiastical union? Ecclesial communion. So that's what supposedly has inspired this new document. From there, he goes on to describe all the articles of this new legislation. And I am not going to describe every single one. I think some of them are just, a little bit redundant, or we don't need to spend a lot of time in them. So I'm going to highlight the ones that I do think have major implications and read from them. And it's actually still quite a bit. You'll see from my paper here, I've highlighted quite a bit with the intention of reading it. So I'll start off with Article 2. It belongs to the diocesan bishop as moderator, promoter, and guardian of the whole liturgical life of the particular church entrusted to him to regulate the liturgical celebrations of his diocese. Therefore, it is his exclusive competence to authorize the use of the 1962 Roman Missal, that would be the traditional Latin Mass, in his diocese according to the guidelines of the Apostolic See. So what he's doing first and foremost is he's taking the authority to regulate and to allow the Latin Mass, and he's giving it back to the local diocesan bishop. Or at least that's what's being claimed here. It goes on to kind of contradict that in certain spots. And so I think we will need some clarification on what some of these points actually mean and how strictly they need to be observed. So we'll get there. Article 3 goes on to say, the bishop of the diocese in which until now there exist one or more groups that celebrate according to the missal antecedent to the reform of 1970. So he's saying any diocese where there's a bishop that governs and there is a group that celebrates the traditional Latin Mass, here are the following things that you need to observe. So point 1 of Article 3 is to determine that these groups do not deny the validity and the legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by Vatican Council II and the magisterium of the Supreme Pontiffs. So this is some sort of like fidelity test, I guess, that is going to have to take place. So the local bishop has to ensure that anybody who attends the Latin Mass has to give their assent to the new liturgical reforms to say that they are valid and that Vatican II is valid. It's interesting that he says he ties this to the magisterium. The thing about the new liturgy, often called the Novus Ordo or the ordinary form, is that it wasn't. There's a lot of confusion about this. A lot of people think that this was a reform that was written by the Council Fathers in the conciliar documents, when in fact it wasn't. They wrote a document called Sacrosanctum Concilium, which describes the vision for a coming reform that needs to take place in the liturgy. But the new Mass wasn't written during Vatican II. It was written by a committee, you could argue a non-magisterial committee of people after the fact, and then approved by Pope St. Paul VI. So what exactly we have to give our assent to? Is it the magisterium? Is it the documents of Vatican II? Is it the committee who came up with the new Mass? I'm not sure. This seems a little bit ambiguous to me still. Also, he doesn't define how it is that the bishops are to attain this fidelity, this statement of faith from those who go to the antecedent missal, or who use the antecedent missal, he calls it. Do they have to sign some sort of a document? Do they have to pledge an oath before they walk in the building? I don't know how realistically that can be observed, but there it is as point 1 in Article 3. Point 2, he says, is to designate one or more locations where the faithful adherents of these groups may gather for the Eucharistic celebration. Not, however, in the parochial churches and without the erection of new personal parishes. So here he's saying that the bishop has to designate a particular location where the Latin Mass is allowed to be performed. But it's not allowed to be in a parochial church. I don't know what that means. This is sort of a strange word, parochial church, and I tried to look it up before I got on here, and I thought that meant parish church. But then he goes on to say personal parishes after. So he's using these two terms as if they're distinct, and that's confusing to me. That seems really either ambiguous or just disorienting, and I'm not sure what he means. I think it's very easy to read this to say that a new location needs to be designated. It's not allowed to be in a parish church, and no new parish churches are allowed to be erected in the service of this. So what does that mean? Are we supposed to be meeting in basements, in gymnasiums? I don't know. My particular community, which is an FSSP chaplaincy, we meet in a parish church. That's apparently against the law now. we will see how that gets enforced. I don't know. I mean, to say that locations need to be found, but they can't be churches is sort of like saying this isn't a church activity. Like I really struggle with that one. That seems like you're backing people into a corner and making it virtually impossible for them to carry on doing what they're doing. Point number 3 of Article 3 is to establish at the designated location the days on which Eucharistic celebrations are permitted. So not only are we restricted to particular locations, but on particular days. So if a particular bishop says, I really only want to let this happen on Tuesdays at 5 a.m. In this closed down school gymnasium, that would be, by my reading, compatible with what we see going on here. That seems to me something that could easily be abused. And the thing about laws is that they're supposed to prevent abuse, prevent authorities from abusing those who don't have power. And this seems to enable a lot of abuse that could occur as a result of this. Point number 4, to appoint a priest who, as delegate of the bishop, is entrusted with these celebrations and with the pastoral care of these groups of the faithful. So the bishop is supposed to appoint a particular priest that he approves of to be responsible for these particular celebrations. This is quite strange and ambiguous to me as well, because, so looking at my own diocese, the archdiocese that I live in, and the particular community that my family goes to celebrate Mass, we are cared for by FSSP priests. So the FSSP is the Fraternity of St. Peter. I can't remember if they're an Institute of Religious Life. I think that's what they are. They're not an order, but they have priests throughout the world who provide the Latin Mass, and they're one of many. But they have come to our archdiocese to provide this pastoral care. It seems to me that you could read this to say that the bishop is supposed to assign a diocesan priest of his own choosing, and only one priest. It says a priest, to appoint a priest. The chaplaincy I go to has 2 priests that are caring for us. Does that mean that that's not allowed anymore? It doesn't really say. It doesn't say who this priest should be, if it should be a new priest, or if groups like the FSSP can continue to provide that care or not. I think clarification there is sorely needed. Point number 5 of Article 3, to proceed suitably to verify that the parishes canonically erected for the benefit of these faithful are effective for their spiritual growth, and to determine whether or not to retain them. So if there are parishes that currently exist that offer the extraordinary form, the bishop has at his discretion the ability to decide whether to retain them or not. It's interesting that he starts off by saying that the bishop. So Article 2, as I read there, is that he's saying that the bishop should have this authority, and then he goes on to highlight all of these very strict observances of what the bishop must do, and they're all restrictive. There's nothing that the bishop is allowed to add or to introduce to this equation or to the life of the faithful. It's all things that he's not allowed to do or that he must impose. So that's interesting to me. And in this case, we have seen that no new parishes are allowed, so nothing can be added, but he can decide if he wants to remove parishes. So there's a clear hostility in this document towards the existing communities that practice and celebrate the Latin Mass. And number 6, again, very restrictive, to take care not to authorize the establishment of new groups. So there are no new groups allowed. So if you are in a diocese where there isn't a Latin Mass currently, it's not allowed. They can't introduce a new one. That again is quite strange. If this is about authorizing the bishops to govern their own sees, then don't you think that would allow them to introduce new groups if there is a need, a pastoral need among the faithful there? Apparently not. Article 4, priests ordained after the publication of the present Motu Proprio who wish to celebrate using the Missal, the Roman Missal of 1962, should submit a formal request to the diocesan bishop, who shall consult the apostolic see before granting this authorization. So if you are ordained after this Motu Proprio is issued, if you want to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, you first have to ask your bishop, and then your bishop has to ask the Vatican, essentially, if he's allowed to do that. And that seems like a fairly convoluted process to just say something that has been available to us for almost 10 years now. Well, actually more than 10 years. What am I talking about? For almost 15 years now. So that's very restrictive, obviously. And article number 5, this is the last one I highlighted, so this is the last one I will cover as part of the document. I would encourage you to go ahead and take some time to read it yourself. That's a worthwhile thing to do always. Don't just take my word or another talking head's word about what is contained in this. Take some time to read it and study it yourself. Article 5 says, priests who already celebrate according to the Latin or the missal, the Roman Missal of 1962, should request from the diocesan bishop the authorization to continue to enjoy this faculty. So again, restrictions are being imposed here. Even among those who currently enjoy certain faculties, they have to ask for permission to continue to do so. Okay, so that's all I'm going to cover. Maybe I'll mention one more thing, which is that at the end he says that this is to be put into effect immediately with the full force of his authority. So there's an apparent urgency in this, and for whatever reason, a very tight timeline. Okay, so what are my thoughts on this? I thought I would share a little bit about my own experience, what led me to start attending the Latin Mass with my family. Well, I had been attending a parish, and I am going to get a little candid here. I've tried to withhold my thoughts on this for some time, but it seems to me that the stakes are being raised here, and it is worth being a little more candid and a bit more revealing into what I think has probably inspired a lot of people to resort to seeking out communities, traditional communities like this. Because I'm not the only one. Since I've started attending the Latin Mass here in my archdiocese, that community has probably tripled in size. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. That's even through the pandemic. And these are people that are retreating away from communities that have not served them spiritually and pastorally, and then found refuge where they are being served spiritually and pastorally. So in my case, my family and I had been attending a parish for some time, which has been in decline. It's been shrinking in numbers for quite some time. There's been very little effort to ensure that the things that people value in the liturgy are retained or enhanced. I used to lead praise and worship at this particular parish. I was the guitar mass guy up front, singing songs with a band that I was helping to lead. And that particular mass was sort of a destination mass because of the amount of time we dedicated to ensuring that whatever we did well. Now, I repent of that because that's not what the church needed. The church doesn't need praise and worship guitar masses. It just doesn't. It doesn't need an adoption of secular culture and then an attempt to wedge that into our liturgies. What we need is authentic Catholic culture to exemplify our great traditional heritage. But I didn't know that. I was a recent convert, and this is what I had been shown. And so I was part of this group that was leading this mass. And this mass, people were pulling out chairs in the foyer to come and attend this mass, not because it's the most faithful liturgy, but just because whatever was being done there was being done well. We would spend hours in preparation for this. We were there every week without fail, not taking vacations, to ensure that the music at this particular liturgy was done well as far as we understood what that meant. Then I got married and had children and had to back away from that and spend time with my wife in the pew to be attentive to our children. And nobody took the time to ensure that musical tradition, or at least the musical care of that liturgy, was ensured going beyond that. Nobody bothered to replace me or the rest of the leaders in that group as it disbanded. And that that particular liturgy and that mass, sometimes you would show up and there would be nobody there to lead any kind of music whatsoever. So the point being that leadership in this parish and in this community was very neglectful of the spiritual needs and liturgical needs of the faithful. Nobody bothered to spend time making sure that it was done well or done at all. During this time, I also spent learning, researching, coming to understand my faith more and more, as I have always done throughout my time as a Catholic. And I came to understand a lot more about the liturgy and the way that it's supposed to be done, and the more recent history of the reforms and many of the abuses that are common in the church. And those abuses are very rampant in the parish that I belong to. And this became a concern for me. I found myself going to Mass and leaving really discouraged by the fact that these abuses are so unambiguous and so in our faces, and nobody seems to have any care or concern about it. I'm someone who adopted Catholicism. I'm a convert to the Catholic Church because I wanted to place myself in a position of obedience to the Church, to the great tradition, the tradition of the Church, which has come down to us through the ages, not the novelties of post-1970s secular culture, which have been, again, shoehorned into the Mass. I had no interest in that, and the more I came to understand that that's what was going on, not to mention the theological problems that might get preached at Mass, but even just the cultural and the liturgical problems would often leave me feeling like discouraged and sometimes even upset and angry after Mass. And it all came to a head for me after a new priest came in and, without consulting any of the faithful in the parish, started to strip away the sanctuary, remove the even somewhat beautiful elements like the presider's chair and the altar server's chair, removed all the candles from the altar that the tabernacle sat on for some reason, and imposed a very iconoclastic vision of the liturgy and of the sanctuary and the church upon the faithful, without asking anybody, without consulting anybody, without accompanying us in these kinds of decisions. Just went ahead and did that. And then proceeded to preach some pretty terrible things, explicitly heretical things from, well, he doesn't have a pulpit, from the microphone. While this was going on, I continued to get discouraged. And at one point, while we were going to receive communion, for whatever reason, I found myself feeling urged to kneel while I received communion. Call it a conscience thing, call it the Holy Spirit. I don't know what was inspiring this, but I decided to do it, even though I really didn't want to, because I don't like drawing attention to myself. I don't like acting more pious than I am. And I definitely don't like to embarrass myself. And this had the potential for embarrassment. So as I went up to the extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, which, again, this parish, this is another characteristic of this parish and many parishes, an over-reliance on lay people, I think just for the sake of making lay people feel like they're involved, to make them feel like they're ministers of some kind, when it's unnecessary. So I approached the extraordinary minister and knelt down, and she was so taken aback by this, she didn't know what to do with me. Now here I am doing something that is within the norms of the church. You could argue that it is the preferred norm of the church, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But this was so foreign to her that she didn't know what to do with me. So she proceeded to pat me on the head like a good little puppy dog or something. She proceeded to treat me like I was so confused that I must be like a special needs person or something like that I just deserved a little encouragement there. At which point I had to explain to her that no, I'm receiving communion. At which point she just shoved the host in my mouth to try and put an end to this uncomfortable situation as fast as possible. I went back to the pew nearly in tears from that experience. I was so humiliated and so discouraged by the fact that my parish didn't seem to understand its own culture and its own faith and its own liturgy, to the degree that when somebody does something perfectly within the norms of the church, it's so utterly foreign to them. That was the final straw for me. At that point, I thought, I can't continue to bring my children to this church and have them be scandalized by an expression of the faith that is not in keeping with the instructions or the teachings or the traditions of the Catholic Church. So we went looking around, and we ended up going to the Latin Mass among a few of the other options that we were looking at. And I have to say that we were really apprehensive to do that. There are all kinds of stereotypes about traditional Catholics that intimidated me and certainly my wife. And so we were quite nervous that we would be out of place. We wouldn't understand what was going on. Would we be dressed appropriately? Would we be welcomed? Would we be judged? We didn't know what to expect. We went and received the most enthusiastic welcome just from random people who came up and said, "Hey, you're new, welcome," and introduced themselves to us. In all my time as a Catholic, first converting myself, then my wife converting, then multiple friends and family members converting, and me participating in that conversion as a sponsor through RCIA and other mechanisms, I've never seen that kind of welcome, the kind of welcome we received that day, which really, it contradicted the stereotypes that we ourselves harbored. And so we continued to go to the Latin Mass, where we found this refuge. And not only that, we found community, and we found a kind of pastoral care that was also unprecedented in my experience. The chaplain, the priest who cares for this community, took such an interest in everyone's lives and provided sacramental prep and catechesis personally. So our kids went into First Communion prep, and my oldest daughter went into confirmation prep. He organized those classes himself and then led them and taught them himself, and then met with each of the children one-on-one and tested them to see if they had retained this new knowledge that he was preparing them for, to anticipate their reception of this sacrament. I've never seen anything like that before. It's always been lay-led and pretty terribly done in my experience. And here was a priest who has the knowledge, who has the experience teaching and catechizing, who is an obvious candidate to do it. And here he was doing that. So we've just found this beautiful community that we love being a part of. And now, after having read this, I'm wondering that with the stroke of a pen, the Holy Father may tear all of that away from us. Someone who is half a world away, who barely speaks English, is going to impose all kinds of restrictions on a community in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and as well as everywhere else in the world. That to me seems like a really strong contradiction against the social teaching, the Catholic social teaching of subsidiarity. And if you are familiar with Catholic social teaching, you will often hear people say things like, it's a vast deposit of teaching, but there are two key points: solidarity and subsidiarity. And if those aren't observed, then there's a problem. In this case, we have legislation coming from Rome that is going to be imposed with very strong restrictions that will dramatically affect the life of my family and this community that we've come to cherish. A vibrant, thriving, flourishing community. Probably the only one of its kind in the Archdiocese, as other parishes are closing down or being twinned and are hemorrhaging numbers, as my old parish continues to do. Even now that things have opened up, we drove past our old parish on the way to celebrate at our current community, and the parking lot wasn't even half full at an 11 a.m. Mass, which is the most popular Mass of that community. And this was formerly one of the biggest parishes in the Archdiocese, and that's what they're experiencing right now. So this is a flourishing community that is now going to be severely suppressed by what's taking shape here. And that's a struggle to reconcile. It's a struggle to make peace with that. We'll see how it plays out. But yeah, that's producing a lot of anxiety for me and for my wife, and I'm sure for many others in the Archdiocese. I want to ask, is this what we should expect from governance in the church? And to spend a little bit of time on this topic. Because I came into the church when just after Pope Benedict was elected. And even though he was known and continues to be branded as a conservative, traditional leader in the church, if you're really familiar with him, he's not. He's not that. If you read his own testimony, his own statements about his time in the church, especially during the council, he was part of a group that wanted to do something new and novel and different, and to retreat away from the Catholicism of his immediate ancestors, what he called 19th century Catholicism. But let's say, okay, fine. So he's a traditional conservative. In his time as Pope, he could have rolled back reforms that had come prior to him. He could have rolled back the new liturgy that Pope Paul VI had promulgated. He could have rolled back any number of things that he supposedly wouldn't have liked as a traditional conservative Catholic. He didn't do that. He honored the tradition that came to him, that he inherited, and he was a guardian of it. He could have stacked the College of Cardinals and the episcopacy with like-minded bishops and cardinals. He didn't do that. How do we know he didn't do that? Well, Pope Francis was elected as his successor. That's how we know. He invited all voices to the table. And John Paul II did the same thing. For a very long reign in the church, between the two of them, they could have ensured that a particular vision, a so-called conservative vision of the church, was guaranteed beyond their reigns. Neither of them did that. They were open to dialogue with different voices within the church. Pope John Paul II gave Cardinal Casper his cap, who was a very, I would say even a notorious progressive in the church. And if it wasn't St. John Paul II, it was Pope Benedict. But between the two of them, he got his red cap. That's the kind of governance that we saw with them. What we're seeing now is a kind of governance where instead of taking the faith, receiving the faith as it exists and being a guardian of it, we're seeing the work of predecessors being cast aside. And in this case, Benedict is still even alive, and his work is already being dismantled before his eyes. This is a disturbing precedent for me, because we see this in secular government a lot, right? So if you follow something like the American elections, you'll see like the Democrats will win a majority in the House of Representatives, or they'll get their man or woman elected president. And then if that's who you like, you'll cheer it on, and you'll see all the things that they're doing and all the things that they're legislating and the changes that they're making. You'll say, great. But then that will only last a certain time, and then a Republican will come in and will start to undo all of those things. And it just becomes this partisan pendulum, which increases the polarization of the people who are observing this kind of thing. And that's the first thing that really I'm having a tough time with this. Because if this is being done in the name of unity, well, we know what happens. We've been seeing this growing polarization in the democratic jurisdictions like the United States, as well as Canada, where I am, and throughout Europe and the rest of the, let's call it the free world. We've seen this increasing polarization because of this pendulum just going back and forth, where nothing really gets accomplished, but we keep just trying to dismantle whatever it is that the previous administration has done. I expect more from the church. I expect more from the Holy Father than to prioritize reversals in the work that was done previous to his election. There are really important things going on in the church today. There are serious problems that need to be addressed. I don't think this should be a priority, and yet here it is. Another concern I have about this is that if this is the way we're going to expect governance to take place in the church, well, far from providing unity, I think what it will do is it will embolden people who represent certain factions in the church. So if this is the work of, say, a progressive faction within the church, well, and this is the way that things get done, even though this isn't how John Paul II or Pope Benedict did things, what we may now see is conservative factions or traditional factions within the church prioritize ambition to attain these certain offices of influence so that they can impose their own vision of the church. And this is all just a great distraction from what we should be doing, which is evangelizing and providing for the pastoral care of the people who are all the faithful who are already within the pastors of the church. Instead, we're just going to be fighting a political partisan fight, which is going to polarize people. I mistakenly, foolishly logged onto Twitter today to see if people were talking about it, and lo and behold, they were. And people who probably don't identify as traditional, maybe just Orthodox, were unanimously expressing disapproval of this move. So this is going to polarize people who were quite a bit more moderate before. And I think people who, maybe you don't attend the Latin Mass, maybe you consider yourself Orthodox, I think that this should be cause for alarm. And it wouldn't surprise me if those flags and those alarm bells are ringing within just merely Orthodox circles. I myself have been accused of being what some tradies will call a normie Catholic, because I don't take hardline positions on things, or because I don't buy into certain conspiracy theories or whatever. But this kind of approach has the potential to take someone like me, who has resisted opportunities to criticize the episcopacy and certainly the pontificate of Pope Francis. And it's the kind of thing that makes me want to criticize, that makes me want to go further and further into these sectors of polarization. I had somebody very close to me say today, after reading this document, that they have resisted not only speaking out negatively against Pope Francis, but even thinking bad things about Pope Francis. And they said, after reading this, they don't know how they can continue to do that. This attempt to try and strip the church from these traditional elements in the hope that everyone who's left over will just all get along as a happy family in unity is very naive. I just don't see that happening. I remember Pope Francis saying early in his pontificate that you don't have to have uniformity to have unity. That you can have harmony in diversity. And diversity, especially among progressives, it's a buzzword. It's a buzz concept. They like to promote this idea of diversity. Yet, what do we see happening here is the suppression of something that is different in favor of a very singular vision of the church and of its piety and its liturgical life. I don't know how to square those two things. This idea that we should be diverse and that there are harmonies. I think Francis even used the analogy of a symphony, that you can have many different instruments and many different parts and even melodies harmonizing together. That's what his vision of the church was, according to those statements. This seems to be a very strong contradiction of those claims. There are other phrases and concepts that keep getting emphasized in this pontificate. Openness to dialogue has been one. I didn't see any dialogue with traditionalists take place prior to the issuing of this Moto Proprio. I certainly don't know anybody that was consulted, even among high-profile people. There doesn't seem to have been any dialogue. This seems to be just a unilateral decision imposed upon the faithful from lands far away in some cases, especially in my case. So this is obviously an attempt to seek unity through absolute, strict, rigid uniformity. And there's another big concept that keeps appearing within this pontificate: rigidity keeps getting denounced over and over and over again. Yet this is a very singular, rigid, not open, not flexible imposition upon the faithful. It seems rigidity is only rigid when it advocates for a certain vision. But other visions that are very rigid, that's fine. That's okay. I think we need to spend some time thinking about that and being more honest with ourselves about what really matters. I'll leave you with this. I want to speak to some of the specific groups who may be observing this. And I can think of 3, and there's probably more. But if you are part of the contingency who's cheering on this development in the church, who thinks this is a great thing, especially if you're a bishop who thinks, yes, in the name of unity, we should be doing something like this. Well, I've already described why I don't think this is going to encourage unity at all. But I think that there's another key consideration here that especially older generations are neglecting, which is that in especially within the Western church, it seems to me that there's a very large gap in religious and clerical vocations in the church. So there are the baby boomers who are on their way out, either through natural causes or through retirement. And I think that they would be representative of the group who is very happy with this kind of a development. Then is Generation X in my archdiocese. There were virtually no vocations from that generation. There was maybe not even a handful, I would say. And then there's the younger generation, so millennials and younger, of which vocations came back a bit. As the baby boomers retire and leave offices of influence and authority, there's going to be a huge gap there, of which the church will have to draw from young millennials to fill these vacancies, including episcopal vacancies. And in my experience, the young clergy have been very orthodox, even traditional. They talk about requests from clergy to learn and to celebrate the extraordinary form of the Mass. That would be coming probably almost exclusively from younger generations, from my generation and younger in the church. This is a generation that has been discouraged by the way things have gone in the church. And I think that if you wanted to promote unity, what would be a very good alternative to what we're seeing now would be to enforce the actual instructions of the church, to enforce the vision of Summorum Pontificum, which said that Latin should be given pride of place, and Gregorian chant, and that all of these elements are part of a treasure of inestimable worth and value within the church. Yet they are treated with contempt. I've never been to a Mass, a Novus Ordo Mass, where Latin was included at all. I've never been to a Novus Ordo Mass where Gregorian chant, well, that's not true, actually. There has been some, but it is extremely rare. Instead, we get folk hymns and guitar masses, and piano masses. If the current ruling factions within the church said, let's make a concession here. Let's try to stamp out abuses rather than stamping out the faithful. Let's stamp out abuses, especially liturgical abuses. Let's deal with heterodox theology that is getting promoted through social media. Let's promote orthodoxy. Let's promote a vision of the new Mass that is compatible with the instructions that have been promulgated. You would see these younger generations of priests getting excited. You would see Orthodox Catholics like me saying, hey, maybe I don't need to go to the Latin Mass. Instead, what we're going to see here is a reaction. You're going to see people more polarized, more disenfranchised with the direction that the church is taking. You're going to see a generation of clergy who are going to feel slighted by this, who are going to become more reactionary as a result of it, and who are then going to step up to assume offices of authority and have very long reigns because of their young age, because of the necessity that they will have to take these offices. So For those who are of an older generation who want to see less divisiveness in the church and want to see less hardline traditionalism in the church, this is only going to promote that, rather than, this alternative that could have been done and that could still be done. If you are an Orthodox Catholic who maybe doesn't attend a Latin Mass, I'm going to repeat myself here, but I think you should be paying attention, and you should be raising your voice in the service of your brothers and sisters who may find themselves orphaned by this, and lend your help and lend your encouragement and lend some accompaniment, which is another word that gets thrown around so much that it's hard to take seriously given this approach to legislating in the church. Lastly, if you are part of a traditional community, whether that be a parish or a chaplaincy like I am, and you find yourself out on the streets after this, kicked out of the parish that you used to occupy, or just restricted from saying the traditional Latin Mass at all, as far as I can tell, there are a couple options that are available to you. You could go and join an SSPX chapel, which I wouldn't blame you if you did at this point, to be honest. I don't see myself doing that, but again, I think that this is going to have a polarizing effect. And so under the circumstances, that wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people end up joining up with the SSPX. If you don't know who the SSPX are, it's maybe worth mentioning a little bit about them right here. Because after the Second Vatican Council, there was a bishop who was part of the council. His name was Archbishop Lefebvre. He was a French bishop who was known as part of the sort of traditional wing among the council fathers. And there were groups of clergy and seminarians who were quite concerned about the direction the church was taking. And so they asked that he help them find a new home, find a seminary, find a new society or an institute of religious life. He reluctantly agreed to form the Society of St. Pius X, which was still in communion with the church and with Rome. But as they formed a seminary in Switzerland and continued to practice traditional Catholicism, they found themselves under some very harsh scrutiny of the Vatican at times, and experiencing apostolic visits, which were seemed to be designed to provoke a reaction more than anything else. And they succeeded in doing that. They got reactions out of the seminarians and from Lefebvre himself in the process, and further marginalized that group. Now, as time went on and Lefebvre grew in age, he became concerned that as the only bishop within the society, if he were to die, then the seminarians and priests of the society would fall prey to the whims of those who govern the church. And that they would probably just break it all up and refuse to give faculties to the priests unless they became part of the new movements within the church and started practicing the Novus Ordo Mass. I've always maintained that Lefebvre was wrong because out of that fear, he ordained 2 new bishops against the explicit command from Pope St. John Paul II not to do so under threat of excommunication. He went ahead and did it because he thought, well, after me, they need bishops to protect them. I've always maintained that he was wrong about that because after the SSPX was excommunicated as a result of that, several priests among their clergy went to Rome and appealed to Rome and said, we don't want to be excommunicated. We want to retain this traditional vision of the faith, but we want to be in communion with the Bishop of Rome and with the Pope. And so they were granted faculties and communion, and their excommunications were lifted. They became the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, or the FSSP. And I've always maintained that Lefebvre was wrong because Rome did care for this group of clergy. And they were able to continue to provide for the pastoral needs and the spiritual needs of those who wanted to celebrate the Latin Mass. So they didn't all get picked off and suppressed in such a way that they would be suffocated out of existence. As of today, I don't think I can maintain that position anymore. Depending on what happens next, it might be easy to conclude that Lefebvre was actually right. That without bishops committed to that vision of the church, to the traditional vision of the church, which had been part of the Catholic faith and culture for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, without bishops committed to that and protecting that, it would get suffocated out of existence. This is a very strong move in that direction. Okay, so I see there is a lot going on in the live chat here, more than I can even keep up with. I don't think I'm going to take questions at this point. I've said quite a bit, even more than I was prepared to say. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. Oh, no, sorry. I was going to say, what's the other thing that traditional Catholics can do? So one is you could join an SSPX chapel. Another, if you find yourself orphaned, where you are no longer able to attend at where you used to. Another could be take your entire community and go and pick up a parish within your diocese and stage a takeover there. Join parish council, join the finance committee, join the liturgical committee, get all of your people in there. That's what's been going on for the past 60 years or more in churches, where activists have been a part of parish councils and committees and have been imposing their vision of the church, which has nothing to do with the actual teachings or instructions of the church. If that's all that works anymore, then I don't think it's wrong to go and do that ourselves. So I don't think that that's a bad idea. If you want to see the Novus Ordo done well, then let's start to promote that vision within diocesan parishes, and let's watch those parishes thrive as a result. I'm hoping that is a course of action that won't be necessary. I'm hoping that we'll still be able to have access to the traditional Latin Mass, but I'm certain that based on this document, which is at times apparently contradictory, and at other times requiring a lot of clarification, I think it will be easy to interpret in such a way that it could mean the expulsion of groups like the FSSP. And we've already seen that in a diocese in France. So the last thing I would say is we just have to pray. Today is the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It's a good day to pray the rosary for multiple reasons. And so for my part, that's what I intend to do, and I would encourage you to do likewise. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for your support. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you next week, hopefully, with the topic that I intended to do this Friday. Thanks, guys. God bless. Take care.